Good evening. Welcome to SSUC's performance of A Christmas Carol. You're joining us here in South Edmonton. We're gathered here, my teammate Nancy and I, whom you'll hear from in a moment. We're gathered here to present to you this wonderful production that has been worked on by so many of our volunteers that you will recognize in this performance. But we'll also say a thank you to all those volunteers who have worked behind the scenes, the musicians, the preparers, the workers on the audio and the visual team, more later on that. But we are so excited to bring you this exciting performance to lift our spirits in this time before Christmas and to gather us together in a fun way, in a meaningful way, to see this wonderful production in our special way. Nancy is going to join you and talk a little bit about other ways that we can respond to our performance tonight. Nancy.
Thank you, Chris. As has been our tradition every Christmas, we have supported the No Room in the Inn campaign. This is a project of the Edmonton District Council of Churches, and each year they choose a different kind of housing project to support. This year, we are supporting the work of two women's shelters. La Salle Shelter is a second stage shelter annually helping more than 30 women and their children as they make their way from domestic violence and transition into a more stable housing. St. Catherine Drexel Place also supports dozens of women each year to stabilize their lives by helping them to pursue career and educational opportunities and goals, and to support them in transitional subsidized housing. This year, these two shelters will be the recipients of the funds from the No Room in the Inn campaign, and in particular, to improve the existing yard areas to make it more possible for the children to safely enjoy play space while the women and the children make their way through this transitional housing to a more secure future. If you're able to support this project, we invite you to support it through SSUC online. You can simply go to our website and donate. You can make an e-transfer at info@smsuc.com, or you can mail a check here to our facility in Southwest Edmonton. Those details will be projected at the end of the play this evening so that you can assist in whatever way you can if that's possible for you. I'm going to turn it over to Pam Patton. Pam is the inspiration behind this Readers Theatre project and has done so much to coordinate what you're about to see. So I'm going to turn it to Pam.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this new adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how this came to be. Charles Dickens was born in 1812, and he proved over a very prolific career in journalism and in being a novelist to be extraordinary in many ways. The fertility of his imagination, his passionate compassion, his passionate interest in social justice, which is a theme through all of his novels. And he was vastly popular. While others had read their works in public before, none had written shorter adaptations of their works and performed them the way that Dickens did. He was a consummate actor, and his reading scripts that he used when he spoke publicly often included special effects like lighting and characters walking on and off, even costumes. There were 6,000 copies of A Christmas Carol published, very coincidentally on December 19th, 1843, which is precisely 177 years ago today. He was 31 years old when that happened. It was illustrated by a friend of his, a political cartoonist named John Leach, and the first edition sold out in 6 days by Christmas Eve. In 1849, he began doing public readings, and the first one was over 3 hours long. Don't worry, our production is not that long. He was very inspired to write this particular novella after visiting the Field Lane Ragged School, which provided London street children with the rough necessities of life. As well as his first, A Christmas Carol was Dickens' last public performance. He died June 9th, 1870, after suffering a stroke. He left one novel unfinished, and I have to believe countless stories untold. He was interred in Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey, which is mostly poets, playwrights, and writers. They're buried or they're commemorated there. I had the great pleasure of spending an entire day in 1982 there, and it was one of the most meaningful days of any travel I've ever done, seeing where he was buried among other greats like Henry James and D.H. Lawrence, William Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, and so many more. It's an experience I hope I'll never forget. And I really encourage anyone who loves reading, even part as much as I love reading, to spend some time at Westminster Abbey one day in Poets' Corner. We hope you enjoyed tonight's performance and that it inspires you to donate to No Room at the Inn or demonstrate any act of charity aligning with Charles Dickens' best intentions when he wrote this time-honored story. And now we give you our take on A Christmas Carol.
Marley was dead to begin with.
There is no doubt whatsoever about that.
The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good as gold.
Old Marley was dead as a doornail.
Scrooge and Marley had been partners for as long as anyone could remember. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole friend, his sole mourner. He never removed Marley's name above the warehouse door. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley.
Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley.
He answered to both.
A tight-fisted, hand-at-the-grindstone Scrooge was, a squeezing, scraping, clutching, covetous old sot. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say,
"My dear Scrooge, how are you? And when will you come to see me?"
no beggars implored him,
Bestow a trifle, sir?
no children asked him.
"What o'clock is it?"
But what did Scrooge care?
Well, he did not care. That is the point. And then, once upon a time,
Of all the good days in a year, upon a Christmas Eve,
Ebenezer Scrooge sat busy in his counting house, counting out his money. It was cold, bleak, and biting, and the city clocks had just struck 3. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep an eye upon his clerk in the dismal little room beyond.
it was a sort of cell, really.
Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller it looked like just one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own office. And as surely as the clerk came in with a shovel, Scrooge predicted it would be necessary for them to part.
The clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at his candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
Miserably.
The door opened, and in walked,
"A Merry Christmas, Uncle."
Scrooge's nephew, Fred.
Bah, humbug.
"Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Oh, surely you don't mean that."
I do. What is Christmas but a time for going into debt and finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? Every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
"Uncle."
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way, and let me do likewise.
"Keep it? But you don't keep it."
Leave it alone, then. Much good will it ever do you.
"Oh, there are many things from which I might derive good without financial profit, Uncle. I have always thought Christmas a kind, forgiving, charitable time, the only time when men and women seem to consent to open their hearts and think of everyone as fellow travelers.
Humbug.
And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold in my pocket, I believe Christmas has and will do me good. And so I say, God bless it."
The clerk involuntarily applauded.
Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation.
"Don't be angry, Uncle. Come dine with us tomorrow."
No. Good afternoon.
"I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends?"
Good afternoon.
"I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. I have never had any quarrel with you, and I'll keep my Christmas spirit to the last."
Fred turns to leave.
"A Merry Christmas to you, Uncle,
Good afternoon.
and a Happy New Year."
Good afternoon.
The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, let 2 others in. Portly gentlemen with books and papers in hand, they removed their hats and bowed to Scrooge.
"Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have we the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?"
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
"Ah,
Well,
Well, sir, it is our festive season. A few of us are raising funds to buy those who are poor and destitute some meat, drink, and coal. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
Oh, you wish to remain anonymous?
I wish to remain alone.
Ah,
Since you ask what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry and can't afford to make idle people merry. I support the prisons and workhouses. They cost enough. And those who are badly off may go there. Good day.
many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon.
The gentlemen scowled, shook their heads in dismay, and let themselves out.
Sorely lacking in empathy. All in all, he's plain miserly. Social justice, not on his compass. Scrooge, how well named is he? Oh, let them starve and let them die, compassionless, not mortified. All around him, life's been very grim. Plight he will not dignify.
At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and almost inaudibly admitted the fact to his expectant clerk.
You'll want all day off tomorrow, I suppose?
If quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to withhold half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound.
Yes, sir.
And yet, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket on the 25th day of every December. Be here all the earlier next morning?
The clerk promised he would, and Scrooge departed with a growl.
Humbug.
The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with tattered comforter dangling below his waist, scurried home to his children and wife.
Ebenezer's quite the guy, a dedicated tightwad, grouchy, rude, he'd make you cry. He really should be outlawed. As an uncle, boss, or friend, he truly can't be trusted. No goodwill does he commend. He's rather maladjusted. When invited out to dine, he sniffs and does not deign to celebrate with theirs and thine a Christmas feast or plain stew. Let's not let this story end. We should not assume he may not ever yet transcend a life so dark and gloomy.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern. Having read the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his bank book, he paid, in disgust, left no tip, and went home.
Ebenezer Scrooge lived in a gloomy suite of rooms overlooking a gloomy, unkempt yard. Nobody else lived there, since Jacob Marley was known to rest in peace elsewhere.
Now, there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the front door, except Scrooge had seen it morning and night every day since Marley died.
And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, looked up and saw in the knocker not a knocker,
But Marley's face with a dismal light about it.
like a bad lobster in a dark cellar.
It looked as Marley used to look, with spectacles upon his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it became a knocker again.
Humbug.
He closed the door with a bang.
Resounding like thunder, echoes pealed through every room. Scrooge, being unconcerned by echoes, fastened the door and trimmed his miserly candle as he climbed the stairs.
Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for it being very dark.
Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge naturally liked it.
But he was just human enough to scan his rooms to check all was all right. He had just enough recollection of that knocker to desire that comfort.
Sitting room, bedroom, pantry, woodpile, fire in the grate, saucepan on the hob, curtains drawn, all is as it should be.
Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in.
Double locked himself in, which was not his custom.
Thus secure, he took off his cravat, donned his dressing gown, slippers, and nightcap, and sat down before the low fire to take his gruel. His glance happened to rest upon a disused bell that had long ago communicated for some purpose now forgotten. It was with a strange, inexplicable dread that he saw this bell begin to swing.
Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking, grinding sound, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar below. The noise grew in volume as it neared, now on the floor directly below, now climbing the stairs, now outside Scrooge's door, now stopped.
Gliding effortlessly through the locked, heavy door, a specter passed into the room, its eyes locked on Scrooge.
I know you.
Marley's ghost.
The same face.
The very same.
Jacob Marley, in his pigtail, waistcoat, tights, boots. His body was so transparent, Scrooge could see through the waistcoat to the two buttons behind.
Now, Scrooge had heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he'd never believed it until now.
No, nor did he believe it even now, though he saw the phantom before him and felt the chilling influence of its cold death eyes. He was
Incredulous.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel by any means waggish. The truth is, he was trying to distract himself and keep down his fear and horror.
Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Why do you walk the earth? And why come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should travel far and wide among his fellow men. And if he does not go forth in life, he is condemned to do so after death. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow confines of our counting house, and so many years of weary journeying lie before me.
7 years dead and traveling all that time? You might have gotten over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
O blind man, foolish man, not to know that regret cannot make amends for life's opportunities misspent. Yet, I was like that. I was like you.
You were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business? Mankind should have been my business. Community, charity, mercy, these should have been my business. The dealings of my trade, our trade, Ebenezer, were but a drop of water in the ocean of what should have been my business.
It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground.
At this time of year I suffer most. Why did I walk past fellow beings with eyes downcast? Why did I turn away from those in need? Why did I not bring light to those who less fortunate than myself?
Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the specter going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly.
Hear me! My time is nearly gone. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escape my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring for you, Ebenezer.
You were always a good friend to me.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second the next night at the same hour, and the third the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and for your own sake remember what has passed between us.
The apparition backed away from him toward a window, raising itself a little at a time until wide open. The apparition floated out through the window into the dark night.
Scrooge raced to close the window and examine the door by which the ghost had entered. It was still double locked, and the bolts were undisturbed.
Hum.
Scrooge tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and being drained by emotion and wonder, he went straight to bed without undressing, asleep in an instant.
Hark, his farmer partner cries, change your ways before you die. Spirit of a life lived poorly, cast misfortune on him surely. Veiled in fog his head was seen, Marley back from in between, telling of his lifelong faults. Poor in spirit, lots of schmaltz. Wasn't Scrooge his friend to tell? Choice of heaven, choice of hell. Hark, his former partner cries, change your ways before you die.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that, looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber until suddenly the church clock tolled a deep, dull, melancholy 1. Light flashed in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old person diminished to a child's proportions.
Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle, and the tenderest bloom was on its skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly, and, in singular contradiction to that wintry emblem, its dress was trimmed with summer flowers.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
Your past. The things you see are shadows of what has been. Rise and walk with me.
As he stood, they passed through a wall, and Scrooge found himself in a busy London thoroughfare. It was plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time.
The ghost stopped by a certain warehouse door.
Do you know it?
Know it? Why, I was apprenticed here.
They went in.
Scrooge sighted an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he might have knocked his head against the ceiling.
Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and called out in a comfortable, rich, jovial voice,
Yo there, Ebenezer, Scrooge, and Dick.
A living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self as a young man came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkie, to be sure, my old fellow apprentice. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very attached to me. Poor Dick. Dear, dear.
You-ho, boys. No more work tonight. Christmas, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up. Clear away, me lads, and let's have lots of room.
There was nothing they wouldn't or couldn't have done for Master Fezziwig. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, the floor swept, the lamps trimmed, fuel heaped upon the fire, and tables set out.
The warehouse was as snug and bright as any could be on a cold, dark winter's night.
In came a fiddler who tuned like 50 stomach aches.
In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile, and the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable.
In came the 6 young fellows whose hearts they broke, and in came all the men and women employed in the business and in the Fezziwigs' home. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, and away they all went.
20 couples at once, hands half round and back again, down the middle and up again, round and round they went. New top couple starting off, old top couple always turning up in the wrong place. All top couples at last, and not a bottom couple to help.
When this result had been brought about, Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance.
Well done, well done.
After the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, there were more dances, forfeits, cake, great pieces of cold meat, mince pies, and plenty of beer.
But the great effect of the evening came after they'd dined. The fiddler struck up a waltz, and the Fezziwigs stood out to dance. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig stood on either side of the door and shook hands with every person as they left.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!
Merry
Merry
Christmas!
The 2 apprentices received the salute of their host and hostess with as much graciousness as 2 young princes. They were then left to their satisfied sleep.
A small matter to make them so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy by making our service a pleasure or a burden. And he himself, a trusted example or a feared, despised tyrant.
Scrooge felt the spirit's glance and stopped.
What is the matter?
I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk.
My time grows short. Quick.
This was not addressed to Scrooge, but produced an immediate effect. Scrooge saw himself older, a man in the prime of life.
He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little, to you very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you, in times to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you.
What then? I am not changed towards you. Have I sought release from our engagement?
In words, no, but in a changed nature, with another dream at its end. Ebenezer, I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were.
She turned from him and fled.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
These are shadows of things that have been. They are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Haunt me no longer.
As he pleaded with the spirit, he was conscious of being overcome with an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bed, where he sank into a heavy sleep.
On silent night, humbling sights, shades of past, truths that last, traded love for cold financial gain, turned his heart away from joy toward pain. Will the lessons he's learned change him toward goals more discerning?
Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom,
There was no doubt about that.
but it and the adjoining sitting room had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were hung with live greenery, leaves of holly, mistletoe, ivy, all reflecting back a light as if so many little mirrors were scattered among them.
And an unprecedented blaze roaring up the chimney.
And amidst all this cheeriness, a kind of throne of turkeys, geese, game, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages.
Mince pies, plum puddings, chestnuts, fruits, 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch.
In easy state, there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike a plenty's horn. He raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the corner.
Come in, and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. You have never seen the like of me before.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Then touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents vanished instantly, and they stood in the street outside the pitiable house of Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit. On its threshold, the spirit blessed it with a sprinkling of his torch. Looking in, they saw Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out poorly in a twice-turned gown,
but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence.
She laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes.
And then 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in.
Outside the baker's we smelt the goose and knowed it for our own.
Basking in the luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, the youngest Cratchits danced about the table, exalted Master Peter as he blew on the fire to no end until the potatoes bubbled up and knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
Whatever has gotten your father then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha wasn't nearly as late last Christmas Day, not by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother. Here's Martha, hurrah. Oh, there is such a goose, Martha.
Why, bless you're here alive, my dear. How late you are.
Her mother kissed her a dozen times and took off her shawl and bonnet for her.
We'd a deal of work to finish up last night and clear away this morning, Mother.
Oh, look, there's Father coming.
Warm yourself before the fire, my dear.
Father's coming, Father's coming.
The 2 young Cratchits were everywhere at once.
Hide, Martha, hide.
So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, their father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder.
Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and his limbs were supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming?
Bob said, with a sudden declension in his high spirits.
Nothing, not coming upon Christmas Day?
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if only in joke, so she came out from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 youngest hustled poor Tiny Tim off to hear the pudding singing in the copper.
Mrs. Cratchit good-naturedly chided Bob on his credulity, and Bob hugged his eldest daughter to his heart's content.
And did little Tim behave?
Oh, as good as gold and better. He gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. Tonight he told me he hoped the people saw him in the church and remember upon Christmas Day who made the lame to walk and the blind to see.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this.
Tiny Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor. He was escorted to his stool beside the fire while Master Peter went to fetch the goose. Bearing the rather sad-looking bird to the table, as if presenting a scepter to a newly crowned king, he was met with boisterous jubilation from one and all.
Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy. Master Peter mashed the potatoes. Miss Belinda sweetened the applesauce. Martha dusted the plates. And Bob sat Tiny Tim beside him at the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody and crammed spoons into their mouths lest they should shriek for food before their turn came to be served.
At last, grace was said, succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit plunged the carving knife into the goose's breast.
When the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, a murmur of delight arose all round the board, and Tiny Tim beat on the table with his knife, feebly crying,
Hurrah, hurrah!
There never was such a goose. Its tenderness and flavor,
Its size, and its cheapness. Eked out by the applesauce and mashed potatoes, 'twas a most sufficient dinner for the whole family, and universally admired.
The plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone to take the pudding up and bring it in.
Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it, while we made merry with the goose.
Hello! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like an eating house and a bakery. That was the pudding.
In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit re-entered, flushed and smiling proudly. The pudding was like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing with ignited brandy and adorned with Christmas holly.
What a wonderful pudding, my dear. Your greatest success since our marriage.
Everyone had something to say about it, and nobody but Scrooge thought it was a small pudding for such a large family.
Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing.
At last the dinner was done, the cloth cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The family drew round the hearth.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! God bless us!
God bless us, everyone.
Tiny Tim sat very close to his father's side, and Bob held his withered little hand in his.
A toast to Mr. Scrooge, the founder of our feast.
Scrooge raised his head speedily on hearing his own name.
The founder of the feast, indeed. Ooh, I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast on, and hope he'd a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. You poor fellow. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, but not for his. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I've no doubt.
They were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with their time together. By and by, they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow. Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, sang it most poignantly indeed. In truth, there was not a dry eye in the house.
When they at last faded, they looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the Spirit's torch at parting. Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last.
Oh, Cratchit's wise, oh, Cratchit's kind, to make the best of worst of times, astute in things that mean the most, though their oppressor Scrooge they toast. The grateful fall love's atmosphere, small goose and pudding once a year. Oh, Scrooge, how can you look their way and see not how you've gone astray? Oh, Scrooge, you see their light grows dim, could be the end of Tiny Tim.
As this scene vanished, it was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the Spirit standing by his side and smiling at that same nephew.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live. He believed it, too.
More shame on him, Fred.
Oh, he's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. His offenses carry their own punishment, and I've nothing to say against him. He takes it into his head to dislike us and won't come to dinner with us. So what's the consequence? He loses out on a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
Everyone concurred, having just enjoyed dinner, and were now clustered around the fire.
Well, I am glad to hear it.
After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family. And after a while, they played at forfeits and blind man's bluff. All the while, Scrooge had a big smile on his face.
Here's a new game. 1/2 hour, Spirit, only one.
It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what, he answering their questions yes or no, as was the case.
Is it an animal?
Yes,
Is it a live animal?
yes,
Is it a disagreeable animal?
yes,
Does it growl and grunt?
oh, yes,
Does it live in London?
yes.
Is it a bear?
No.
At every new question put to him, Fred burst into a fresh roar of laughter.
Is it a fearsome beast?
Yes, most definitely, yes.
I have it. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it?
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes.
Scrooge had become so light of heart, he would have drank to the entire company. Alas, the scene passed off, and he and the spirit set out. Much they saw, and far they went. In misery's every refuge, the spirit left a blessing, and Scrooge his precepts. Suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bell struck 12.
Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more.
We say Scrooge has some humor deep within his velveted soul. He really could use some beauty sleep beyond the midnight bell's toll. Distressing how we miss our chance to revel in joys large and small. A full life seems so much happenstance. Be careful or you'll miss it all.
Remembering the prediction of Jacob Marley and lifting up his eyes, Scrooge beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached.
When it came near, Scrooge bent down upon his knee. The phantom left nothing visible save one outstretched hand. The spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. I fear you more than any specter I have seen this night. But as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before him.
The night is waning fast, and time feels precious to me. Lead on, spirit.
The city sprang up about them, and they were suddenly outside Scrooge's counting house, near which gathered a group of merchants and street dwellers.
Yeah, I don't know much about it. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
What was the matter with him?
Ah, God knows. I thought he'd never die.
What's he done with his money?
I haven't heard. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Many people came and went, curious and anxious to nose about and comment upon the death and the material wealth left in its wake.
They left this busy scene and went into a shop where the greasy remnants of life could be sold. A woman hauling a heavy bundle slunk in. She'd scarcely set it down before another, similarly laden, entered, closely followed by a gaunt man in faded black. After a short period of blank astonishment, the three burst into eerie laughter.
Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. Who's the worse for the loss of a few trifles? No dead man, I suppose. Especially that wicked old screw.
Let the charwoman alone to be the first, and let the laundress be second, and let the undertaker's man be third. What have you got to sell, dearie?
Open that bundle and let me know the value.
The shopkeeper went down on his knees to open the ragged bundle and dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark material.
What's this, then? Bed curtains?
Bed curtains? Ha! It's blankets it is.
His blankets?
Whose else's, do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without 'em now, I dare say.
The ragman pulled a shirt out of the bag.
And you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it by dressing him up in it, if it hadn't been for me.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
The scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept for, uncared for, was the body of the plundered man unknown.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with this death. Anything, kind spirit, anything.
The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before. There they found the mother and children seated round the fire.
Quiet, very quiet. The little Cratchits were as still as statues, looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework.
And he took a child and set him in the midst of them.
Where have I heard those words? I did not dream them. The boy must have read them out as the spirit and I crossed threshold. Why did he not go on?
The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hands up to her face.
The color hurts my eyes.
The color?
Ah, poor Tiny Tim.
They're better now again. It makes them weak, this candlelight. And I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home, for all the world. It must be near time.
Past it, rather. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these last few evenings, Mother.
I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulders very fast, indeed.
And so have I, often.
And so had all.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so. It was no trouble. There's your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and Bob came in. His tea was ready on the hob, and they all tried to help him to it the most. Then the youngest got upon his knees and laid, each child, a dear little cheek against his face, as if to say,
Don't mind
Don't
it,
mind
Father.
it, Father.
Don't be grieved.
Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to his family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls.
Oh, you will be done long before Sunday.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you so much good to see how green the place is. But you'll see it often. I promised him we would be there on Sunday. My little child, my tiny Tim.
He broke down all at once. They all broke down. And Scrooge, even Ebenezer Scrooge, wiped away more than one newborn tear. A moment passed, during which Scrooge appeared to be in deep thought.
Spectre, tell me what man that was with the covered face, whom we saw lying dead?
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone, answer me one question. Are these shadows of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be?
Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which he stood.
It is true that men's courses foreshadow certain ends. But if a course be changed, its end will change. Say it is thus.
The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept toward the untended grave, trembling. Following the finger, he read upon its stone his own name.
His eyes burst wide open, his heart grew 10 times. The life he was living, he must leave behind. But was it too late to start over again? Or are we renewed when each new day begins?
Am I that man upon the bed? No, spirit, no. Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I was. Why show me this if I am past all hope? Assure me that I yet may change these outcomes by living an altered life.
For the first time, the hand faltered.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and keep it all the year. The three spirits shall live within me. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in.
He was checked in his transports by the church bells ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and thrust out his head. No fog, no mist, no night, a clear, bright, stirring, golden day.
What's today?
Scrooge called down to a boy in Sunday clothes.
Eh?
What's today, my fine fellow?
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?
I should hope I do.
An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there, the big one?
And the one as big as me.
What a delightful boy. What a pleasure. Yes, young buck.
Ah, it's hanging there now.
It is? Go and buy it.
What's this then?
I am in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here that I may give them the directions where to take it. Come back with the poulterer, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown.
With that, the boy was off.
Off like a shot.
I'll send it to the Cratchits. They shan't know who sent it. Ha ha! It's the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer.
And was it a turkey? It never could have stood upon its legs, that bird. They would have snapped off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax.
Scrooge dressed himself in his best and went out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them while traveling with the ghost of Christmas Present.
Walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows tipped their hats and said,
Good morning, sir, and a Merry Christmas to you.
and Scrooge said afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest.
In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash for it and did it.
The door was answered by a young maid.
Is your master at home, my dear? Nice girl. Very nice girl.
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress.
He knows me. I'll just go in there, my dear. Fred! Oh, Fred!
Why, bless my soul. Who's that?
It is your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. Let him in? It's a mercy his nephew didn't shake his arm off. Ebenezer felt at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful kinship, wonderful happiness.
It's beginning to feel a lot like Christmas. Everywhere Scrooge goes.
But he was early at the office the next morning.
He was extra early.
If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late.
That was the thing he had set his heart upon, and he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob.
Bob was a full 18.5 minutes behind his time. His hat and comforter were off before he opened the door, and he was on his stool in a jiffy, driving his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello. What do you mean coming in here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
Oh, it shall not be repeated, sir. I was making rather merry last night.
Now, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to stand this any longer. Therefore,
Scrooge leaped up from his stool, and giving Bob such a dig in his waistcoat, Bob staggered back into his cell.
and therefore I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and looked as if to faint.
A Merry Christmas, Bob.
Scrooge spoke with unmistakable earnestness, clapping Bob on the back and shaking his hand.
A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have ever given you. I've raised your salary, and I'll assist your struggling family. We will discuss the details this afternoon over a bowl of smoking bishop. Make up the first and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I or cross another T. Bob Cratchit, sir.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father.
He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good city of London knew.
It was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, and that his lively spirit and care for others was as deep as a well, as wide as an ocean, and as genuine as the spirit of Christmas.
Friends, may that truly be said of us, all of us.
And so, as Tiny Tim observed so eloquently, God bless us, everyone.